first of all, when we get married, we have to go to a ritual bath for the first time. And we are considered impure, and we have to go to a ritual bath where it's so, I'm gonna like spare the audience because there's so many like rules. You can't have fake nails on, you can't have any scabs, you can't have cuticles, you have to be completely, the water has to be able to touch every single part of your body. And one of the lies that they say is if you have tattoos, you can't go and dip.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Try to apologize, and I was not gracious for their apologies. I didn't accept them. Went on a block party because it's like, oh, now you want to be you don't want to be the dead fish going with the current. You want to swim against the current because you see that, at 16, I got my first modeling gig. And I would be on photo shoot sets doing the makeup, doing the hair. And one time they asked me to fill in for somebody who didn't show up. And when I saw the pictures, because when I look in the mirror, I look at my reflection and I spit. And when I look at pictures, I'm like, there's no way that's me. There's no way that's me. And when I looked at these pictures of me, I was like, that's how I look? Like, well, for real?
Did you eventually go back and find yourself a nice Jewish man and get married? And did you eventually have to go that route, that traditional ultra-Orthodox Jewish woman route?
I didn't want to be like I remember when I was in grade school, girls at 16 were being pulled out and getting married at 16. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to get married young, of course, but unfortunately I did. And because I met somebody and...
it was a choice. It wasn't arranged. It wasn't anything like that.
In a way, it was a choice, but in a way, I was also a sheep led to the slaughter because when I met my ex-husband, he had his own home already. He's almost 10 years older than me. He was a place for me to escape to. Mm-hmm. And my mother would say to me, whenever I'd, come back, the neighbors asking, where are you? What am I supposed to say to them? You can't be living in a man's house because that's completely against the law. You can't even be in the same room at a certain age with a man without having the door has to be open.
This podcast right here would, according to that sect of religion, would be improper and illegal. Me sitting in a room with a closed door with you alone, it would be illegal.
If we didn't have the cameras on us and all that stuff, yeah. And I believe that, I would babysit. I was the babysitter of the block. And I remember when the husband would come home and pay me, he would leave the front door open. And I'm a young girl. I was already babysitting 10 years old. I was changing diapers at 6, So we become a woman and we're considered responsible for, really responsible for all of the commandments at 12, and the men are 13. And the reason why the men get an extra year is because they believe men mature later than women.
I think that's true. I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's very true.
It is true. It didn't pertain to me because at 3 already, I was being expected to do all of these things. And once you turn 12, the fastings start. All these things start. And it's not good to be considered an adult at 12 because you're still a freaking child at 12, especially nowadays and age. We're not developing as quickly as, my mom, all her,
It's an easier life.
Yeah, they had the weight of the Holocaust on them from their ancestors, so they didn't dare step out of line out of respect. My mom said that when she'd sleep over at her cousin, the cousin's mom would be screaming in her sleep, so loudly screaming because she had been through the war. Mm. So, we would just constantly hear these stories and we would be guilt-tripped into, things like, how dare you want to date somebody out of your culture? If you would have been killed, if you were in Germany, you would have been killed for being a Jew and you're willingly going out and you're fraternizing with the non-Jews, you're a traitor.
Was your husband Jewish?
So he would never be approved, ever. by my parents, because he by law, if your mother is a Jew, by law, you are a Jew. Now, we didn't do his whole lineage and stuff like that, but his grandma was also a Jew, so we knew we couldn't go completely back, but his dad is a freaking Texan, 6'7", his name, I'm not going to say his name, he's Irish, you know, I believe he told me he would go to church and everything. And so my ex went to public school. He couldn't read Hebrew, didn't know anything about our culture. He always had a thing for religious Jewish girls. He said it would be a what's the word? Like, if he could get a Jewish girl to look at him, it would be a victory for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's this weird thing that guys like rabbis' daughters, pastors' daughters, they say like we're very wild because we grow up so...
They say that about cops' kids, too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they say that about cops. And there's some truth to that. So cops' kids do have a tendency, or they used to. I don't know if it's true anymore. They better not in my household. But they have a tendency to be a little bit more on the wild side because they can get away with a little bit more. Mm. They have a little bit more leeway than the average person, and people, it's not that way anymore. I doubt it's that way anymore. So you get into this marriage, and it's more of an escape. It's a place to go. And by the way, I know one of my very good friends escaped her household in much the same way by getting married when she was 17. So I understand the concept behind it. But once you got married, did you realize, hey, I might have made a mistake?
What happened is when my mom would use the neighbors as an excuse, like, because she cares so much about what other people think, I was living in sin because I was living with a man and we weren't married. So she began to pressure. Also, when he met my parents, you know, he had to prove, my ex doesn't like not being accepted, that his ego couldn't handle that. So he actually went to Israel, he went to a yeshiva. He learned, yeah. He did whatever he had to do to prove to my parents that he was worthy of me. And, which at the time, you know. So
it's endearing. Hey, look at this guy working.
It seems like, wow.
Look at this guy working hard to get my affection.
But it was just all love bombing. You know what I mean? It was just all love bombing. So when he gets back, my mom is like, you guys have to get married. You're living in sin. So I couldn't drag anything out. And I walked down that aisle. I didn't have a choice because I was living in sin. If I was given a choice, I would have most probably...
And you still have that victim's mentality where...
Like, I have to do what my mom is telling me I have to do because I'm so young. And I couldn't stand up for myself. So once we get married, first of all, we had a complete religious Jewish wedding. And then my ex, only his mom's a Jew. The rest of his family, completely not Jewish. All of... like, my daughter's cousins are not Jews.
By the way, I've been to enough Jewish weddings. I love...
Religious ones?
Yes. Not...
Like where the men and women are separated? Like, we can't dance together.
We're talking
no father-daughter
reformed.
dance.
It's reformed. Yeah. And there's certain things I love about Jewish weddings. I love the stomping of the glass. May your marriage last as long as it takes to put that glass back together, which I think is very beautiful.
Oh, they told you that? It's actually to signify the destruction of the temple.
There's a couple, and that was the one that I like, so I'm going to steal that one.
Okay, I never heard that one. Yeah, that's really cool.
And some people actually get the shards of glass put into like acrylic, like all shattered. So I always thought that was really cool. But I will tell you this, and Jewish people, you need to do better on this. The food at Jewish weddings, the ones that I've been to, is god awful. It's like, I love challah bread, okay, but beyond that, I was like, I'm not real big into sesame seed butter, and I'm not real big into that. Bad food. You go to like Italian weddings, they do trump everything. Italian weddings are pretty damn good. But yeah, that's the one problem I have with Jewish weddings.
I'm shocked because
I couldn't stand it.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's so many rules and laws with kosher. So you're right. You can't mix meat and dairy. You can't. So you are very, very limited. But I will say this. My mother, she's such a good cook and baker, and that's like one of the really good things she passed on to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, the food that I make is bomb. So maybe it was a bad caterer.
Beautiful wedding. It was gorgeous. I mean, it was absolutely gorgeous. Nothing, no cost spared. But I just wasn't crazy about the food.
Wow.
Now, are you still married? Well, obviously, you said your ex. No.
First of all, when we get married, we have to go to a ritual bath for the first time. And we are considered impure, and we have to go to a ritual bath where it's so I'm gonna like spare the audience because there's so many like rules. You can't have fake nails on, you can't have any scabs, you can't have cuticles. You have to be completely, the water has to be able to touch every single part of your body. And one of the lies that they say is if you have tattoos, you can't go and dip. And I have a tattoo, and now it's covered up because, you know, I'm not married anymore, and I branded myself with my ex because, you know, and he has a huge tattoo of our wedding monogram on his back. And but
and you also can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery,
which
right?
is BS, because I remember asking my teacher, but what about the Holocaust survivors? Aren't they buried in Jewish cemeteries?
So there's a great story.
It's a lie.
There's a great story. There was a Jewish mercenary who worked for Pancho Villa. This is a true story, but it was a Jewish mercenary that was from New York, worked for Pancho Villa during the Mexican-American wars down south. And there's a reporter doing a story on Pancho Villa, and he's talking to this guy, and they made a movie about it. So years later, he sees him in Brooklyn, and he had a tattoo right here. And when he sees him in this deli in Brooklyn, he lost his arm. And he goes, my mother's happy I lost my arm because at least I can get buried in a Jewish cemetery.
It's not true.
Yeah.
I was able to dip every single time I went. They say a lot of things that turn out to be not true.
No, that's what we're here to. We're here to dispel some myths.
I went in with my fake nails, but let's add on to that. My mother worked in those ritual baths. So my mother she was able to always get me in first ahead of everybody else. But it was also for shame. She didn't want her coworkers to see me. She didn't want other people to see me. That was the real reason she was letting me go in first. So before your wedding, the night before you go into this ritual bath, it's because we cannot have sex on our periods. We're deemed impure when we are menstruating. And check this out. So I do the ritual bath. Totally traumatized me. It wasn't beautiful like they say it is. And I come out, and we have the Jewish wedding. It's completely separated, which means the men are on one side, women are on the other side. We celebrate. It's like two weddings happening. And turns out on my wedding night, I have my period.
Oh, no.
Which is like considered a really bad omen.
Well, was it wrong?
It's considered a really bad omen. Well, I guess, because we got divorced.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're like...
But periods shouldn't be bad omens. It's a sign of health. And because I have 2 autoimmune diseases, I didn't even think I could get pregnant, because sometimes for like a year I cannot get my period, and then sometimes for half a month I could have my period.
Ooh.
So, yeah, welcome to autoimmune deficiencies.
Ooh.
It's brutal. And so... basically, I couldn't have my wedding night. So I had to go through the whole process. It's called NIDA, of doing what you have to do is basically when you bleed, you can't touch each other. It's very, very strict, very stringent. You can't touch each other. You're not supposed to sleep in the same bed. You're supposed to put something down to always like remind you not to touch your husband. Obviously, behind closed doors, me and my ex weren't keeping to it that strictly, but I know my mother was expecting me to. But basically, after the wedding, you have 7 days of partying where like you're being like watched. So like basically because it's kind of hard to explain, but the 7 days of partying is so you're not alone and you're being watched. And I think because the way we grew up with such purity culture, and we don't know anything about masturbation, we don't know anything about exploring our bodies, anything. When you have sex, it can be very traumatizing because you're not taught anything about it. So I remember a doctor saying to me, do you think once you learn to ride a bike, you can unlearn to ride a bike? And that was the greatest parable he gave me, because I was terrified, and it felt like it was excruciating. And unfortunately, I had to be fucked up in order for us to do it, because I could not clench and not immediately, like anytime I'd be sitting at the table from 3 and up, my dad immediately would, you couldn't pick up your knees at the table. You always had to have your legs crossed. My dad would snap at me if, my skirt dare, he thought I was sitting in a way that was unbecoming and not modest. So even me, after being overseas, witnessing car bombs, 3 car bombs in one night, buses blowing up. I worked for an organization that picks up all the dead bodies after the suicide bombers go off. I witnessed, I would get to see all 16-year-olds who wear prosthetic bellies filled with explosives and walk into supermarkets and just blow themselves up. They would do it on donkeys, and it was a terrifying time. I mean, any time I got on a bus, I didn't know if I was going to get off that bus.
Yeah, that's a scary.
I was only 16 when I was.
That's a scary thing. But here's one thing I want to ask you. Would you still consider yourself Jewish after all this
Hell
stuff?
No. People will say, well, you're a Jew. I say I'm a human. I am an American. And I happen to be born to parents that are Jewish, because being a Jew and being Jewish are 2 totally separate things.
Well,
my ex technically is a Jew, but he didn't know anything about our culture. He didn't know anything about anything.
I used to have this, one of my friends, when in my early 20s, she was Jewish. And we used to joke around, and I'd say, okay, I'm of Irish descent. That means my family's from Ireland. And this person is of German descent. That means they're German. This person's of Italian, so forth and so on. And I said, you're Jewish. Where are you from? And she without question, she used to go, I'm from Jewland. That's exactly what she used to say, because I was really good friends with her. And because you're technically the people without a land, but you have Israel.
Well, it's not ours as long as we don't have peace.
But you're of the Russian descent and German descent, and but people, the reason I say Jewish is because the Jewish people seem to identify primarily, they lead with their religion. So if you ask somebody, just a regular Christian, okay, they're not going to say, well, what are you? Well, I'm Christian. Well, nobody says that. They're like, oh, I'm of Irish descent, or I'm of Italian descent, or so forth and so on. But the Jewish people are very different with that. They will lead with their religion. It's a little odd, because you got to come from somewhere, But here's the cool thing. How you grew up does not have to define how you live the rest of your life.
Amen.
All right? You had to be raised. Unfortunately, the pain that you went through has molded you into the person. And I've gotten a chance to speak to you a little bit. And I like the person that you are now.
Thank you.
But guess what? Here's the beautiful thing out of all of it. Had you not gone through all that ugliness as a child, probably would have never met, right? So there's some beauty in that, right? So why don't you tell our audience where they can find you?
Well, I have an Instagram page called Daughter Chasya, but there's a C there. I do not accept anybody that looks like a fake account or a troll account. I have I think at least 1,000 requests, but I'm very careful with that account, because my ex is watching me. My ex we're battling it in court. My ex has always been a stalker. I had no idea to what extent until when we went to court. He knows what I'm doing at all times. And he even told me when we got divorced and I was living in my condo, he's like, I have someone in the neighborhood watching your every move.
Well, tell him if he's going to watch your episode, at least subscribe.
Anyways, I'm sure he's going to watch it.
We welcome it. We welcome it.
Let him. Yeah. Let him watch it. I have also a YouTube page, which it's Daughter Chasya as well. What else?
And there is a GoFundMe page?
Yes, there's also a GoFundMe on my YouTube. There's a link, and also a stepdaughter Chasya, because right now we're in court battling over my daughter right now.
And we're going to put a link to that in our show notes. All of those things.
And I'm pro se, and he has a fiance who seems to, it's definitely not her face that he's after, it's her pockets. She seems to be a very financially successful person.
I'm still thinking about those 50,000 shekels that your old man turned down. I was like, oh, man.
But he did it to be pious and devout, right?
Yeah.
But she's funding all of his legal fees, and what he doesn't realize is lawyers get paid whether they lose or not, and it's being dragged out. Luckily, we are right now custody 50-50. He's an absolute deadbeat. He hasn't paid child support in years. And he comes from a very well-to-do family. And I mean, I would never want it to be said about me as a man that I don't take care of mine, no matter what.
Anybody can be a father, but it takes a real man to be a dad.
Yeah.
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 So, Chasya, we're coming to the end of this thing here, and I always try to just quantify all this stuff that you went through with a final question. It is my belief that suffering is what propels you to the next level. You've gone through quite a bit being involved in this cult-like atmosphere, and it's hard to call something a cult.
No, it's a cult. When you all have to dress the same,
you
talk
can
the
call
same,
it a cult, but I
live.
It has all the
We're
characteristics.
separatists.
It has all the characteristics of a
Yeah,
cult.
wasn't allowed to talk to somebody who wasn't of our faith.
And I know it's taught you some stuff, because I think there's always
Sure,
a lesson
sure.
in suffering. So can you tell me what your suffering of being involved in this cult has taught you?
This is gonna shock you, but the one thing that I have taken from my religion is prayer. I don't know why, but every time I pray,
Because it's good for the
God
soul.
answers me. And he protects me. And Chasya actually means God's protection. And they say the name that we're given is the last form of prophecy in this world. And the one thing that I hold dear to me is prayer. And that's basically it. I take all the good morals and the good ethics that I was taught, but I'm going to wear what I want. I'm going to cuss. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to say the word pissed in my house. We're not even allowed to say Jesus. We would have to say Yashka. Like, why are we giving so much precedence to Jesus? I never understood that either. I wasn't allowed to be a human. And now, if I don't want to work one day and I want to sleep in bed and watch Boardwalk Empire, I'm going to do it. And nobody's going to tell me what to do. Like, I basically married my mother and my father with my ex. Like, he was both of them, sadly. Like, I didn't just, you know how they say you marry your parents? So now I'm, still in therapy. I'm very pro therapy. I'm all about trauma dumping. A lot of people think therapy, it's like, why would I want to tell a stranger my secrets? That stranger has to sit there and you get to trauma dump on them. And that's their job. And some people don't like the idea of the clock watching. And what you have to understand is they're not looking at the clock to get you out of there. It's because they have to make sure that the next client can come in. I remember getting insulted by things like that. But the one thing you have to be very careful in a therapist, for someone that's been in therapy since maybe 6th grade, you don't want a therapist who's going to leave you dissected, bleeding like a frog on a table. Like when
You have to bring about some healing.
yeah, and there's a lot of therapists where you go in and you cry and you sob and you bring all these things out and they
they're
just leave you bleeding out.
All right, gotta go.
Yep.
Yeah,
Just
I know
like
those.
dissected like a frog on a table, just bleeding out. Those kind of therapists, and if you believe, because another thing I found out is a lot of therapists are on drugs too, because their job is so hard.
I've had enough therapists in here to know that while they try to help you get better, a lot of them have their own issues as well. And because they're
Yes.
but here's the thing, they're human.
They
They're
are.
human.
They
just
are.
just like, the people in your community that do wrong, they're human.
That's why I said when someone says, "What are you?" I say, "I'm a human being and I'm an American."
Yeah.
And if they want to dig deeper, we can dig deeper. But I can't just spit out, "Hey, I'm from the most the most extreme of, you know, and like we didn't have to be that extreme, but when we moved from Brooklyn to Lakewood, my parents, you know, something in them, they just completely flipped out and turned into, like in New York, they were just a little bit more. And, you know, my grandparents lived in Borough Park, you know, that's Hasidic world over there, you know. I played with some of the biggest rabbis' children, and they were kinder to me. They were so much kinder to me than my own family was. And they were even more religious than I was.
Well, at least a Hasidic will shake your hand. And it doesn't, did your father ever shake a Gentile's hand?
A man, yes, but a woman, no.
Okay.
Oh, my father always believed in holding doors open for women. He's always would tell us stories about like the people that were saved in the Holocaust, or the people that said good morning and treated every other human being like an equal. And we call it being a mensch, you know? And I don't know if these are real stories or they just say it to indoctrinate us to be good and to be obedient and to...
Well, does it matter? If it doesn't. If it makes you into a good person, it doesn't matter whether the stories are true or not.
I love South Park. I think South Park is a genius show. I think it's a brilliant show. And one of the greatest things that I took from South Park is, I think the episode is called The Passion of the Jew, and it's about, you know, Mel Gibson's movie. And Kyle, he freaks out, he denounces his faith or whatever, and it boils down to the end. There's always a lesson in South Park, and the lesson is that we should not take all of these books that were written thousands of years ago literally. They're to teach us to take away the good and the lessons, but not to take it literally, because back then there was no electricity, there was nothing back then. So of course, if they're wandering around in a desert, they're most probably tripping balls, eating peyote, and they're seeing burning bushes. First of all, the Bible is written by men. I know, I've watched the Torah being written, but it's called a sofer, which it's a special thing.
Portions of the Bible were. The Bible was canonized at the Council of Nicaea in 422 AD, when Constantine flipped the Roman Empire into Christianity. But there were books that were written, because there's the Gospel of Mary, which they found at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gnostic Gospels they call it. So there were things written by women. It's unfortunately men ruled the world back then, and they left the women out, which not the right thing to do.
Definitely. I mean, women aren't even allowed to sing in our culture.
That's crazy.
We can't sing.
Crazy.
We literally are to be in the kitchen and to serve the men. Of course my ex would want to come into a culture like that.
It's not a bad...
He gets to be a king.
It's selling a good product.
I have to be a submissive person.
Well, Chasya, I do appreciate you coming in here. I do appreciate you talking about this.
I appreciate you having me so much.
Because I could sit here and talk about just because I'm out of my curiosity about religion and how you grew up, because I enjoy it. I enjoy the history of it. I enjoy the dogma of it. So, but I do appreciate you coming here and opening up.
If you ever want to do a part 2, I'll be completely down to come.
That sounds great to me. I'm in.
Awesome.
I'm in.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, The Suffering of Cults with Chasya. And let's think about all the stuff that we learned. Every religion has a sect that's radicalized. There are victim blamers and there are victim shamers. Beware of all the illusions. Look where the trick's being played. We all need protection, but most importantly, and you said this, and I don't even think you realize you said this, glow up, don't blow up. I love that. And that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X. We're now on Rumble. And don't forget, always OnlyFans. And don't forget to follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson. And, of course, follow the Suffering Podcast. We're going to see you on the next episode.